Imagine a busy airport in Los Angeles, a place where people are always rushing, talking, and pulling suitcases. Right in the middle of all this chaos, there's a line for first-class passengers. In that line stood Keanu Reeves. He wasn't dressed like a rich movie star. He wore a simple plaid shirt, worn-out jeans, and old boots. He had a backpack that looked like it had been on many adventures. He was calm and quiet, just watching everything around him. Behind him stood a man named Victor Harding. Victor was the opposite of Keanu. He wore a fancy suit, shiny shoes, and expensive cologne. He acted like he was very important, and he looked down on Keanu. Victor couldn't help but make a comment. "First class, huh?" he said with a smirk. "You never know who you'll see here." Keanu turned and looked at him calmly. "Yeah," he said, "the world is full of surprises." Victor frowned, expecting Keanu to be upset. But Keanu just stayed quiet. Victor tried again. "No offense, but you don't look like someone who flies first class," he said with a little laugh. "It's rare to see someone so casual here." Then it was time to board the plane. Keanu and Victor walked onto the plane. Victor was surprised to see Keanu sitting right next to him. "You've got to be kidding me," Victor muttered, shaking his head. Keanu just smiled. "Looks like we're traveling together," he said politely. Victor was uncomfortable. He couldn't understand why this man he had judged was now sitting next to him. He decided to ask Keanu about his job, thinking he knew the answer. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked. Keanu, putting his backpack under the seat, replied, "I work in film." Victor raised his eyebrows. "Oh, I see. Commercials, small-time stuff?" Keanu smiled and shook his head. "Something like that." Victor laughed. "I always find it interesting how people try to find their place," he said. "But sometimes certain spaces just aren't for everyone, like first class." Keanu looked at him calmly. "I think we all have our place," he said, "and sometimes it's exactly where we are." Victor laughed again. "That's nice, kind of deep," he said. "But real life isn't that simple." Keanu didn't say anything. He just looked out the window. Victor kept going. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "you might be sitting here, but there are things money can't buy. Some places will never really belong to certain people." Keanu looked at him with a patient but firm expression, saying more with his eyes than words. Victor, seeing he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted, leaned back with a satisfied smile. He thought he was in control, but he was wrong. The plane took off and the flight attendant started serving drinks. Victor ordered champagne, wanting to show off. When it was Keanu's turn, he simply asked for water. Victor couldn't resist making another comment. "Water?" he asked, almost laughing. "Don't tell me you're going to waste the experience of flying first class with water?" Keanu took the water and said calmly, "I'm fine with this. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor narrowed his eyes, trying to understand Keanu. "Yeah, I guess that works for people who settle for less," he said. "Not everyone is born to enjoy the best life has to offer." Keanu took a small sip of his water, not saying anything right away. Some people on the plane started to notice Victor's mean words, but since Keanu seemed calm, they didn't say anything. "Maybe best is different for everyone," Keanu finally said, still very calm. Victor didn't like that answer. He tried to keep control of the conversation. "Or maybe people who say that just never had the good stuff," he said. "Some things are just out of reach for certain people." The flight attendant, who was serving drinks, glanced at them, wondering if she should step in. But she saw Keanu was handling things well. He just smiled a little and looked out the window. Victor wasn't happy. He wanted to make Keanu mad, but he realized Keanu was hard to upset. Victor thought he was winning, but the other passengers were starting to feel uncomfortable with his rudeness. The flight attendant came back with more drinks. Victor tried again. "You know, life is like flying first class," he said, waving his champagne glass. "You work hard, you get this spot, and you enjoy it. But some people, well, it seems they're just lucky to be here." Keanu put his water down and looked at Victor. His eyes were calm, but he seemed ready to say more. "Luck or hard work, we all land in the same place, right?" he said, his voice calm but firm. The people around them, who were listening quietly, started paying closer attention. The cabin got very quiet. Victor smiled, trying to hide that Keanu's words bothered him. "Well, I wouldn't say that," he said. "Some of us are just on a higher level. Not everyone understands the value of being here." Keanu leaned forward. "I think the value of being here," he said, gesturing around the seat, "isn't about what you have but how you treat others." His words hung in the air. Some people nodded and others gave Victor approving looks. Victor looked uncomfortable. He tried to laugh it off. "That's a good one," he said. "First-class self-help. Maybe you should give talks." He tried to sound sarcastic. Keanu just smiled a little and looked forward, ending the conversation. His calmness said more than words. People around them started to react. Some whispered and others looked at Victor with disapproval. A couple who recognized Keanu stayed quiet, respecting his privacy, but they admired how he handled things. Victor noticed people were watching him and not in a good way. He started to look less confident, but he still wouldn't admit he was wrong. He thought he was winning, but the reactions told a different story. He didn't know what was coming next would change how he saw everything. As the flight attendant collected empty glasses, Victor tried again. "You know what's funny?" he said. "People who have nothing always talk about things like being humble and simple." Keanu leaned forward, looking Victor in the eye. "I've noticed that sometimes, people who talk the most about what they have are the ones who feel the emptiest inside." Victor was stunned. He couldn't find the right words. People glanced at each other, impressed by Keanu. "Look, I don't mean to be rude," Victor said, finally speaking. "But the world is tough. If you don't show what you have, people ignore you." Keanu leaned back. "Maybe," he said calmly. "But I think true success doesn't need to be shouted about. It speaks for itself." Keanu's words felt important. Some people nodded and others gave Victor disapproving looks. The atmosphere in first class changed. Everyone was watching Keanu and Victor. An older man nearby shook his head, showing he didn't like Victor's behavior. Victor, noticing the stares, tried to hide his anger. "Cheap philosophy," he said. "It might sound nice, but the real world doesn't work that way." Keanu looked at him, still very calm. "The real world is made by people, Victor," he said. "And in the end, how we treat others says more about who we are than anything else." Victor was very uncomfortable. He looked around and saw everyone was watching him with disapproval. He realized his plan to show off wasn't working. He thought he was in charge, but Keanu's words were changing how people saw him, and maybe even how he saw himself. The cabin was very tense. Victor crossed his arms, trying to hide how much Keanu's words bothered him, but he was starting to look angry. Keanu, however, was still very calm. He looked straight at Victor and broke the silence. "You know, Victor," he said, "I understand what you're saying. The world can be tough. But I've learned that sometimes when people need to prove things, it comes from something deeper. Maybe an insecurity, a struggle inside." Victor frowned, not sure if Keanu was trying to be mean or just talk. "Struggle inside?" he laughed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You're wrong." Keanu smiled a little and shook his head. "Maybe," he said. "But I've met many people who thought success was just about showing off. Deep down they were trying to fill a hole inside." Those words hit Victor hard. He got quiet, playing with his wedding ring, looking lost in thought. But he quickly got his tough act back. "That's not me," he said. "I worked hard for everything I have, and I don't need anyone telling me how to live." Keanu stayed calm, choosing his words carefully. He looked at Victor for a moment. "I'm not saying you didn't work hard," he said. "I just think we get so caught up in showing off that we forget to look inside. Who are we without all this stuff?" Victor pressed his lips together, clearly uncomfortable. The question seemed to echo in his mind, but he wouldn't admit it bothered him. "Who are we?" he said, laughing in a mean way. "We are what we build. Without it, we're nothing." Keanu looked at him seriously. "I don't agree," he said. "I think we're known by what we do for others, not what we own. And what we show the world matters less than what we carry inside." He pointed to his chest. His words filled the cabin. Some people nodded, while Victor looked like he was about to explode. "That's easy for you to say," Victor said, almost standing up. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." Keanu's voice was firm but gentle. "You're right, I don't know your story," he said. "But I don't need to know it to see that sometimes, when someone shouts about what they have, they're hiding something. Fear, insecurity, loneliness." Those words hit Victor like a punch. He froze, his face red with anger and maybe shame. He clenched his fists, trying not to lose control. Then he stood up quickly, knocking his empty glass to the floor. "You think you're better than me?" he yelled, getting everyone's attention. "Sitting there with your smart words, acting like you know everything? You don't know what it's like to live in the real world." Everyone went quiet. The flight attendant came over, trying to calm things down. Keanu stayed seated, looking at Victor calmly. He waited for Victor to finish. "I don't think I'm better than you," he said gently. "I just think we need to stop and think about what really matters. And Victor, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." Those words made Victor sit down again. He looked away, more defeated than angry. He sat in silence, Keanu's words echoing in his head. He felt exposed and vulnerable. But he didn't know the worst, or maybe the best, was yet to come. The flight continued in a heavy silence. Victor stayed in his seat, not looking at Keanu, but he was clearly upset. Keanu, on the other hand, looked relaxed, like nothing had happened. A little later, the flight attendant came to Keanu with a smile. "Mr. Reeves," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "the captain asked me to tell you your connection in Tokyo is confirmed. He sends his best regards." The name Reeves echoed through first class. Some people who had been watching quietly opened their eyes wide. A whisper went through the cabin. Victor froze. "Reeves?" he said, almost in disbelief. "Keanu Reeves?" Keanu nodded politely to the flight attendant and thanked her, not paying attention to the noise. He turned to Victor, who looked like he had seen a ghost. "Is something wrong, Victor?" Keanu asked with a small smile. Victor opened his mouth but couldn't speak. He looked around, seeing people staring at him with curiosity and disapproval. He looked completely lost. Victor sank into his seat, mumbling. I had no idea," he said. "I mean, you didn't say who you were. I didn't know you were you." Keanu's voice was calm but firm. "I didn't think it was necessary," he said. "I don't usually use my name to introduce myself." Victor tried to defend himself. "Look, I didn't mean to offend you," he said. "I just didn't know who I was talking to." Keanu sighed and leaned forward. "Victor," he said, "what you said doesn't change just because you know my name. The truth doesn't depend on who you're talking to. It depends on how you choose to treat people." Victor was speechless. He looked at Keanu, then at the other passengers who were now watching closely. The shame on his face was clear. Keanu broke the silence with a final lesson. "You know, Victor," he said, "life is hard enough for everyone. The last thing we need is people trying to put others down to make themselves feel bigger." Victor nodded a little, unable to argue. For the first time he seemed to really think about what he had done. Keanu leaned back in his seat, ending the conversation. Victor sat still, staring at his hands as if playing every word in his mind. Victor wasn't just facing Keanu. He was facing the truth. He realized that trying to make someone else look small had only shown his own flaws. The rest of the flight was quiet. Victor, who had acted like he owned the place, now looked very uncomfortable. He couldn't even look Keanu or the other passengers in the eye. The pride he had at the start was gone, replaced by shame. As the minutes passed, Victor kept thinking about Keanu's words. They were simple, but they hit him hard. He started to question his own behavior, remembering how often he had judged people without even trying to know them. "Maybe he's right," he whispered to himself. He glanced at Keanu, who was calmly reading a book as if nothing had happened. This made the situation even more powerful. Keanu hadn't tried to prove anything. He had just acted like himself. As the plane got ready to land, Victor finally found the courage to speak. He turned to Keanu, his eyes still lowered, and said, "I need to apologize. Not just because you're you, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot." Keanu looked at him, still very calm. He waited a moment before answering, "I appreciate the apology. But more than that, I hope you learn from this." Victor nodded slowly, realizing this was a chance to change. Then Keanu continued, "Sometimes, what we look for most in the world is what we find least inside ourselves. I hope you figure out what really matters." Victor was silent, but Keanu's words stayed with him. He knew this moment could change him if he let it. After they got off the plane, Victor stood still in the airport, watching Keanu walk away. He saw fans quietly come up to him, wanting to say hello and take pictures. Keanu greeted each one with patience and a real smile, without rushing or showing off. It was clear that his kindness came from inside. Victor looked down at his own hands and sighed. He knew he needed to change. Keanu's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that a person's worth isn't about their status, but about how they treat others. As Keanu disappeared into the crowd, Victor felt something new, hope. Maybe this meeting wasn't an accident. Maybe it was a chance to start over. In the end, we all make choices that shape who we are. Are we living to impress others, or to become better people? Keanu's words teach us that true success isn't about what you achieve or show off, but about the good you do for the world and the people around you. So, the next time you find yourself judging or arguing, remember that respect and humility are always in style. And maybe the change you want to see in the world starts with you.